planet.
You're listening to the Corbett Report.
Welcome, friends. Welcome back to the Boiling Frogs Post Roundtable, or the Newsbud Roundtable. I'm James Corbett of CorbettReport.com, and you might remember a couple of weeks ago we were talking to Sibel Edmonds and Peter B. Collins and Pepe Escobar about Newsbud, the forthcoming brand new media venture from Sibel Edmonds and the Boiling Frogs Post team, but catapulting into something much larger, something of a much grander scope. And we talked about the forthcoming project, what it's going to be about, funding for that project, etc. So I will suggest, if you haven't done so, that you go back and listen to or re-listen to that conversation. But today, we're going to have an entirely new conversation with a couple of different people that I hope you will be familiar with, but if not, we will introduce them. So, of course, we have Sibel Edmonds of BoilingFrogsPost.com lined up today, but we also have Bill Conroy, who I'm sure attentive Corbett Report listeners will no doubt remember from interview 388, interview 478, and interview 659 from 2011, 2012, and 2013, respectively. I'm sure you all remember that. We have Guillermo Jimenez of TracesOfReality.com, a frequent guest on CorbettReport.com, and you might remember him from such great stellar series as the now defunct Beard World Order. I don't know. We're still working on our beards.
We're still working on it.
Yeah, we should do that at some point. All right, so let's bring people on one by one and introduce them properly. Of course, first of all, we are joined by Bill Conroy today, and I hope you will be familiar with some of his work. But for those who aren't familiar with Bill Conroy and his background, Bill, tell us a little bit about yourself, the work that you do, and why you do it.
Well, I've been a journalist since the early 80s, actually, and worked mainstream publications, weeklies, dailies, magazines, and basically as my day job, trying to put bread on the table. But I've also done investigative reporting for those publications, and probably since 1999 as on an independent basis, since at that point, right around then, it became impossible for me to continue doing it for my mainstream job. They basically encouraged me not to do it anymore. And basically the issues I've followed has been the drug war, police or law enforcement corruption, national security, as those kind of bleed together, and immigration, border issues. I lived near the border anyway, in San Antonio, Texas, for like 20 years. Last couple years, I've been since moved to Seattle, so I'm on the other border. And there's a range of issues there since I moved here that I've been covering that deal a lot of it, still kind of with the drug war, but the other side of it is the legalization of marijuana and cannabis, and really how that's unfolding in this neck of the woods, which isn't really about the marijuana as you might expect. It's more about the business and the money and market position and all that kind of thing. So you're seeing a lot of interesting things develop, including government intervention that is potentially less than uninfluenced by other the usual stuff where special interests are kind of manipulating the market, and basically still following up on things related to the drug war, and national security happens everywhere. So it doesn't matter where you are, as Sibel well knows. And so that's basically my background. And looking forward to working with Newsbud and having the chance to really devote more time and resources to the effort. I think in the last show with Peter Collins, that kind of came up, and and I think it was Sibel saying that most people that are doing independent journalism or authentic journal, or however you want to call it, real journalism, now are doing so on their own time, because there's not a lot of positions left in the corporate media for sure that allow you to do it and make a living. And so if you really want to do it, it's got to be kind of a labor of love. So the opportunity to actually be able to pay the rent, put food on the table, and pursue my labor of love, is like, that doesn't come along too often. So I'm pretty excited about Newsbud for that reason.
Exactly so. And, it's kind of the old chicken and the egg question. Does Bill follow the drug front around, or does the drug front follow Bill around? That's really the question. Anyway, all right. Guillermo Jimenez, again, as I say, should be familiar to my listeners at tracesofreality.com and, of course, frequent contributor to boilingfrogspost.com. But Guillermo, always new people tuning in. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you came to be involved in all of this.
Yeah, okay. So background as far as issues is not unlike what Bill was talking about, although I don't have anywhere near the resume that Bill has in the background on these topics. But yeah, similar issues that interest me: drug war, immigration, border issues, stuff like that are my primary interests. What's going on in Latin America as far as the geopolitical chessboard also interests me. Things like that are sort of my area that I focus on. I won't call it expertise because I'm by no means an expert on anything, I don't think, but I do enjoy reading into these issues and exploring them. I got into journalism as a hobby, probably like a lot of people who are now in alt media. I got into it as a hobby, as a side thing, what I was doing after my day job kind of thing. Late 2010-ish, early 2011, something like that. And that slowly just blossomed into something else and something I could do, devote more time to. Did a radio show for a while. I'm doing a podcast now. I've been doing a podcast now for a couple of years, 2-3 years. Traces of Reality, Demanufacturing Consent over on Boiling Frogs Post, of course. And we've worked together a few times, James, on the old Beard World Order that we should bring back at some point. It was for the name alone, we can't let that go. So as far as this new project, I'm super jazzed about it, very excited about it for the very same reasons, of course. Doing this, as Bill just said right now, I don't want to get too repetitive, but I feel the same way. That much of the time that we devote to stuff like this is our own time. We're not getting paid for it, so it's stuff we do after work or when we have some spare time to devote. And when we do devote our full time, it's something that really there's not much in the way of financial gain from it, unless you're working for a gigantic corporation, mainstream or state run media outlet. You can't really make a living off of it. But when something like this comes around, where it's completely reader supported, completely listener supported, and we can get the funds and the finances necessary for us all to do this full time and be able to, as Bill was saying, provide for ourselves and our families, and also have the resources to do top-notch stuff, reportage and journalism and multimedia reports, podcasts, whatever the case might be. That is the ideal situation. So. I'd also like to encourage your listeners out there, our listeners out there, to donate to this project. I think it's going to be very, very worthwhile, and you guys will find a lot of value in it.
Well, let's talk about that value a little bit. So, Sibel, boilingfrogspost.com, of course, and the head of this Newsbud media venture. Let's talk about what is actually going to be happening. Before we started rolling, you suggested the idea that we all talk about some of the ideas that we could explore if we had the funds and budget that we are hoping to amass with newsbud.com. And I wanted to throw the ball, first of all, in your court. Looking around at the news media landscape at the moment, what is a story that interests you that you think Newsbud would be able to cover in a new, interesting, or innovative way, given the types of resources we want to have to be able to throw at these issues?
Well, currently, less than 2 hours from me is the town of Burns. I wouldn't call it a really city. And it has been witnessing this uprising and the after effect and the recent shooting of Lavoy Finicum and the post cover-up of that shooting that is currently going on. And from what I have been following, and I have been following it very, very closely, with the media, both mainstream media and the alternative medias and even independent bloggers, unfortunately, I have not seen a solid journalistic work and real coverage of what has been taking place for the past 1 month, 30 days plus. Right here, which is the issues are significant, and the events that took place are significant. And what currently, or in the past few days, has been developing since the shooting of Lavoy Finicum have been very significant. Yet, when I am reading the coverage, both from the so-called local media here, which is mainly Oregon Live, but also the mainstream media coverage from AP, Reuters, etc. I haven't seen a real coverage of what has been taking place, why, and also the objective coverage of various factions, people, interests involved in this. You get a lot of, you know how it is, they put everyone in one bucket and they say yes, or they pick 2 or 3 or 4 figures, okay, with some videos. And usually those people tend to be cartoonish characters or engage in some outrageous stuff that almost everyone here, every single one of us would shake our heads and say, oh my God, that's gross, that's disgusting. Who are these low-life people? But again, that I believe, and from what I have seen, the people I have met, and I have been traveling around, I have been meeting with various people who have been directly involved or they are indirectly involved with what has been taking place. It, I would say, is a gross misrepresentation. And in a way, I know it's going to come as a surprise to a lot of people. They're going to say, what? What kind of analogy are you making here? I see this parallel between how the mainstream media tries to marginalize whistleblowers. And I went through that. And I had 150 members for my organization. And how, again, the same media outlets have been portraying and marginalizing. I'm not saying, you know, I don't want to right now get into the negative or positives. This faction that is so mixed is made of several factions, and misrepresentation of what is taking place and who are the people involved and why they are involved. And the more I'm getting close to the people who are on the ground, they are involved, their families, or the related cases in other states, whether they are in Idaho or they are in Nevada or they are in Utah, the more I realize how much lies and balonies these publications have been giving us. And also it's unfortunate because I see some really awful made up information through the, you know, blogosphere. It's I don't know how much of it is purposeful or how much of it, again, just people playing journalists, citizen journalists, theorizing everything. There's no fact checking. There are no interviews. None of these people have gone there, have talked to any of these people. So this tells me there is this vacuum here. There is this void here. And nobody, neither locally or in the country, is covering what's really going on there and who these people are and what kind of grievances they have had. You know, this didn't come about overnight. I mean, there is this outrage that had been built and is still being built by you know, within ranchers community, the farming community, the rural western community, and because there really has never been real thorough coverage of these issues. For a lot of people, it's like overnight, a few crazy people grabbed their guns, went in there, and they took over the building. Well, that's not the narrative, folks. And because the reason they are giving you that narrative, because they are not engaged in real journalism. And the best expert here to talk about this in terms of what are the ingredients of solid, good journalism to cover, let's say, an event like this and the involved people and the involved interests, the context, the history, etc. here would be, of course, the expert, because I am not an investigative journalist. The expert here is Bill Conroy.
Bill, do you want to pick that up? What do you think a real investigative report along these lines would actually look like, and how would it differ from what we're seeing in the MSM right now?
Well, the thing with investigative journalism, at least in my experience, is it kind of uses reasoning, and I always confuse these two, deductive and inductive reasoning. One is you reason from the particular to the general, and the other is you reason from the general down to the particulars. And I think typically what happens with investigative journalism is you go in with a working theory. You know, you might have one that, oh, the ranchers are right, or the ranchers are wrong, or, you know, whatever. It really doesn't matter, because you 9 times out of 10, that working theory you go into with, which is just something that kind of lets you line up who you want to talk to and what the story is about, goes out the window very fast. These stories end up being, taking on a life of their own. If you're honest about it, and you can suspend your political and ideological leanings, or at least be aware of them, so you can see where they're blinding you to things you should be asking, and that's really very important. So the dynamic in this story has been, and there's probably truth along the margins with it, that it's these extremist militia types who are completely against the government, regardless, and they're privileged white people for the most part, and blah blah blah, and they're really the worst of the worst. So everyone on the left hates them, and then everyone on the right, hates the left for hating them, and it becomes this political thing, right? And that doesn't get you anywhere, because those stories are a dime a dozen. I could argue both sides of it probably, and convince people, make people happy on the right and the left, but never together. so I give that's not my goal with investigative journalism, and I don't think it should be. It's at the end of the day, with a story like that, you do have to talk to all the parties. You got to talk to the ranchers and see where they start, where the militia types, and how much of this action was really representative of their, these things are can be analyzed. For example, you may have a legitimate B for a legitimate objective, but then your strategy and tactics can be off. So if you employ bad tactics, so taking over the wildlife refuge very well could be, a horrible tactic in this, in the service of what might be a legitimate objective, that kind of thing. So you got to look at all that and kind of parse it out. And in that story, I'm less interested, because Sibel's right. That's an age-old battle, the ranchers and the government in the West. I mean, that's part of American history. In the struggle over water rights and all that could be a very interesting story if the water's on federal land and the ranchers are having to pay to get water and graze their cattle, whatever, are they being abused? Are those deals fair? Are the ranchers being many of them might be really wealthy. Are they just wealthy interests looking for more? How many of them aren't? How many of them are just, day to day scrapping by, like a lot of farmers in the Midwest that just, are getting kicked around and their real issues aren't being paid attention to. So I guess what I'm saying is you got to kind of go in there and just, to the extent you can, suspend your own, blinders and look around and find where the story is, because there's all kinds of stories in that particular thing. One that interests me, and this is, the Black Lives Matter movement is getting a lot of attention, and of course their major concern is police use of force and the excessive use of force in almost all these occasions where people didn't need to die. And it's focused in that case on, the disproportionate violence against people of color. And, I think factually that's pretty, pretty much borne out that there's something going on there. There's a problem. But it's separate from, some other issues. But what seems to be a defining force here, if you're going to do a story about excessive police force and too many people getting killed when they don't need to by the police, you got to look at how that issue plays out. It does definitely have a racial component, and that's what Black Lives Matter is really bringing out. But in general, if you have a police force that is too quick to kill, you would see that pattern play out in almost any encounter, or many more encounters than just necessarily that are racially tinged. You would have a problem with a militarized police force. You would expect this problem to show up in greater proportions, maybe with people of color, but it's still showing up across the board. It's a problem with society. And in reality, to solve that problem, it's better to go at that issue than turn it into a racial divide, because you don't get anywhere. Then people just fight over, white privilege and, black folks are, and the truth is, it does disproportionately probably impact people of color more. But if you get at the underlying issue with an investigative story and say, in reality, what happened in Oregon, with the FBI shooting of this guy, and you'd have to get the facts. You have to look at the videos, the dashboard cam, and talk to people. At least explore that issue. Was this a case of an unnecessary murder, unnecessary shooting of a civilian? And is it the case that law enforcement, because of the militarization of the law enforcement over the years, which you can get the facts to show that, have become trigger happy? They're more likely to shoot than not shoot in all these situations, and that's the real issue here. It doesn't matter if this guy was a right-wing person or a left-wing person. Nobody deserves to get shot down like a dog, right? And we can all agree on that. Black, white, and yellow, and red, and everyone in between can agree on the fact that we don't need a police force in this country that is unnecessarily, not that that is killing people in great numbers that don't need to be killed. There's something wrong there, and that's the way I would start getting into that story. And if you start filtering the questions and the people you talk to through that lens, you paint a different picture of what's going on there. It's and you get at, I think, a bigger issue in the country that maybe unites people around a problem that needs to be solved, instead of what so often happens. They are divided over these issues that are affecting all of them, and they don't see their self-interest in them. So, a good investigative piece can kind of strip away all the layers of, mirage and get to the kernel of what is really going on in that given situation. And that's when you do that, and you do it in a way that it's bulletproof, where the facts and the documents and the information you're bringing forward, are, to your best of your ability, the truth. It gets read, that's usually the problem. Those things get buried or they don't get published. But it gets some, it actually has a platform where it can be published and people can read it. And readers will always bring their own ideological framework to things. I've learned that. And you don't need to tell. I think you need to be clear about your own biases, or so the readers kind of know what your biases are, so they can adjust for that when they're reading them. But at the same time, I think you're foolish as a journalist if you think you have some magic power to affect the ideological framework of your reader. They're going to bring that to the story. What you got to give them is the facts. And when they start plugging those facts in that story into their framework, and they start to agree with that, when you do it right, they start to agree with. The left and the right starts to disappear, and it suddenly becomes, this is the real issue. Here are the facts to back it up. And I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican. This is a real problem that we as a country need to solve. Those are the best kind of reports. I think that's what journalism is supposed to be doing.
Bill, I think you have just made me re-excited about the possibility of real, true, independent, good journalism, because it is so easy to inject the man versus woman or black versus white or rich versus poor narratives into all of these different stories, and to get people to rage click on them and to generate traffic that way. It is so difficult to put together a story that shows people their commonality and where the true problem lies. So that's the kind of thoughtful journalism that I hope we will be able to accomplish at some point in the near future. Speaking of which, Guillermo Jimenez, if you had the magic wand and you could devote as much time and resources to a story or an issue as you were able to do, what tickles your fancy? What do you think you'd like to devote your time to?
Man, okay. I know you primed me for this question at the opening, but I'm still not prepared for it, because I can't think of one thing. If I had all the resources in the world, what would I want to? Well, I guess it'd be the stories that I mentioned in the opening that I'm most fascinated by, right? It would be things that dealing with the drug war, things dealing with the border issues, things dealing with immigration and that sort of stuff. But yeah, there's so many stories. I mean, just to piggyback on what you guys were talking about this specific story, there's so many like this that are the way they're presented through most of the media, whether it's alt media or mainstream media. It's very, very divisive. it's very clear that they're either this, or that. Like, for example, with this Oregon situation, they're either, patriot heroes who are starting the next American Revolution, or they're terrorists, right? They're part of Al Qaeda. Have you guys seen the hashtag Al Qaeda on Twitter? So it's one or the other, at least from my perspective. I'll confess that I haven't followed the story as closely as I probably should be. But from what I've been gathering through my social media feeds, that's generally the way the story's presented. But I guess Bill, you raised a really good point that there's not much. Even let's think of this another way. Even beyond just investigative journalism, because Newsbud is going to provide more than just news reports. We're going to have opinion and commentary and analysis and things like that. Even in that sense, it's usually one or the other. There's very little nuance. There's very little higher order thinking going on with a situation like this. So even if you have your own biases, which we all do, and you present them through your writing or through your podcast or through whatever you're doing, I would imagine that given the sort of diverse group of people that are going to be involved in this project, you're going to have different opinions. You're going to have disagreements, even within the same organization. And that's awesome. How often do you see that within a single media source? You don't see much disagreement or variety of opinion when it comes to a variety of stories. So with this story, and again, this is one of many, there's so many different ones that deserve more attention like that. So I guess that's my answer. If I had the budget for it, devote more time to stories like this. Well, like even the Black Lives Matter movement, and look at it more critically with an open mind, but looking at both sides and giving it a good amount of thought, and not just knee-jerk reaction based on your own ideology. So don't know if that answered your question, but
I think it does, and it goes towards pointing out the fact that this is obviously kind of a moving target that we're trying to shoot at here. But it's the point, again, of being able to marshal the resources necessary to cover these in a thoughtful manner. And if I may take a moment to take a stab at this question, because I don't think I've, at this point, actually elaborated on this, but I'm not going to be on the payroll of Newsbud or have a specific position with Newsbud, but I'll still be at CorbettReport.com. But what I imagine, what I would like, what I aspirationally would hope in the near future, if there is the budget for it, is perhaps with Newsbud to work on a documentary project, if there's the ability to do that.
Glad.
So I guess my position would be twofold here. One, as the reader of Newsbud, I would love to be able to see a real investigative report on something like the Zika virus, because I see all kinds of wild speculation going on about that right now, and it's very difficult to sort out, because obviously you're going to have a mainstream media take, and then you're going to have the alternative media take, and I'm not sure I trust either one of them particularly. So I'd love to see true investigative journalism on something like that, because I think that could be an extremely important story, but maybe not. But from my own perspective, then, if I had the resources to be able to devote towards a documentary project, I would love to do something, for example, on something that I think is exceptionally important, but you would never be able to raise funds for on a Kickstarter or something like that, because 99% of people wouldn't even know what it is, let alone know why it's important. But I think the Bank for International Settlements, absolutely an exceptionally important institution that almost no one on the planet knows even exists, let alone what it does.
I don't know.
There you go, the central bank of central banks in Switzerland, in Geneva. There, what does it do? In Basel. What does it do, and why does it do it, and how does it do it, and who's involved in it? Very, very important story. And I did that Federal Reserve documentary, which obviously has some interest from the American public, but the BIS, I mean, who's interested in that subject other than a bunch of bankers? And yet it is such a central part to the entire international financial system, monetary system, that no one knows exists. So that's the type of thing that, wouldn't it be great if we had the ability to fund a documentary project on that, spend the actual time, the months, and if not years, it would take to gather the interviews and all of the documents and everything to put out a really top-notch documentary on something like that. That's the kind of thing that I would love to be able to do, and I hope at some point with Newsbud that might be possible.
Well, I would like to actually put it on record, because from the beginning, early stage of conceptualizing Newsbud, that was one of the ingredients actually I listed, and it started, and I'm not I'm technologically challenged. I still use regular calendar. I write on them. I don't program my smartphone. So it was in writing in my notepad when I was putting the ingredients. And one of the main top 4 or 5 ingredients was being able to produce our own independent documentaries or mini documentaries and be able to have travel budget, and let's say if we need an additional camera person for the crew, and that's absolutely something that we are going to have, we are going to offer, and frankly, you are the one that that I know, who I know and trust, that would be like first on that list, and we will be featuring your work from Corbett Report. It will be on our news site and our homepage. So because you are producing excellent material, and I'm not saying here to just be complimentary, because I have my own 5, 6 places that I have to visit when I wake up in the morning and I'm having my coffee. Well, one of them on the top is Corbett Report, and we have worked together for a long time. So we will be presenting your work there because you're from Corbett Report, but also absolutely mini documentaries, documentary series is on the list. We are going to have that for sure. And Guillermo brought up a very good point. He talked about the fact that even within our news organization, we are going to have different perspective, biases, our own baggage, etc. And one of the beauty of this is going to be, let's say we have Bill Conroy's article, investigative report on a particular issue. Side by side, next to it, there may be a little video, 5 minutes video, either a roundtable or analysis that may be looking at it from a totally opposite perspective or a different perspective. And the reason I call our people, our first year partners and associates, is I know our people can handle that and they are good with that. And in fact, they appreciate that. And that's a rarity, because I have dealt with people like that. And that was one of the things I told you, James, that I was really afraid of. End up in some sort of organizational bureaucracy and then have some Nini come to me and say, you did this and that person was bashing this. I don't want to be with you any longer. I can't deal with that kind of crap. And we have really blunt people. I love it. And we have people who appreciate the differences of opinions and ideologies. I love that. I can't deal with those kinds of infighting and bureaucracy. Somebody here mentioned head of the organization. We're not going to have titles like CEO, CFO, CTOs. I just guess disgusting. We don't have that. We are associates and we are doing this. For example, for investigative stories, I will be going to the head of our investigative journalism, who is Bill. So it's never going to be the other way around in terms of the editorial thing. For example, I get potentially legitimate whistleblowers coming to me, and it's been happening at least once every 2-3 months. Sometimes they present me with documentation to prove their case. It's going to be Bill who I'm going to go and say, what do you think? And how do we even authenticate this document? Because you need resources. Do we send it to some sort of forensic lab? But then if we send it to even if it's a private forensic lab, and let's say we have the money, but then we are compromising the information. These are all the things, because I have never claimed to be a journalist or an investigative journalist. So I'm going to be going on this subject, investigative reporting. I'm going to go to the head of that section, who is Bill. So there is nothing that about me being ahead of this and that doesn't exist. And that's one of the issues I have been dealing with, not having the resources to establish legitimacy. So in some cases, I am pissing off some journalists because I'm being too cautious maybe, but I'd rather be cautious than go ahead and publish something. And then later it comes out that either something was exaggerated, or if it was false, or it was a setup. They wanted us to fail. So they send someone to pose as a whistleblower. That person talks a good story, shows some documents. You get a good feel. Go ahead and run it, and then slap. And once you lose that credibility, it's so hard get it back. So again, I'm going to be working with people who are seasoned, who know how to look into it, who know how to do fact checking. I don't. So that was the second point that I was going to bring up. And I totally forgot the third point. So I'm going to pass the mic to you.
Well, it couldn't have been important then, right? All right.
Exactly.
All right. Well, let's remind people that the funding drive for Newsbud is going to kick off on Valentine's Day, February 14th. And, of course, you can sign up to the Newsbud mailing list if you want to keep informed of all of that and all of the developments and all of the people that are getting on board and all of those types of things. You can find out through that email list, which, of course, will be linked in the notes for this video wherever you're watching it. But before we start wrapping things up, first, let's just turn back to Bill. Bill, if you had something to say to any of the people out there that are thinking about supporting Newsbud or something like it, what would you like to say to them about the need for this type of organization?
Well, I guess if you're a reader out there wondering whether you're going to support or able to support, first of all, any amount helps, right? With an effort like this, $5 to $5 million. Not that anyone's going to give $5 million, but the point being, the more people that participate, the broader the effort can be. Because the end result of this would be an organization that's serving the readers, right? That's really who we would be accountable to. So, if someone gives $5 million, we're going to be as accountable to that person as the person that gave $5. That's the theory. At least that's the way I see it. Because every reader. Every reader is the same in the sense they all matter. And too often that isn't how the media works. It's only certain readers that matter, or certain niches of readers, or readers of means, and that means a whole swath of what matters in life is just not given the relevance that it deserves, especially in a democracy. So, if in fact 1% of the people control 95% of the wealth or whatever, and you're counting, you're beholding as a media organization to that 1%, you're leaving 99% of the people of this country off the table. And, that's just not acceptable. The reason that journalism is protected in the Constitution, from my point of view, isn't because, it's there to, serve the interests of those that already have power. It's there. You need that protection, the First Amendment protection, because if you're really practicing journalism the way you're supposed to, you're gonna tick off some powerful people from time to time, and they're gonna come after you. And that's why, and history taught us that, and that's why it's in our Constitution that you need press protection. The powerful don't need press protection. It's the people writing about the powerful that need press protection, especially if they're not writing about it in the way that the powerful deem in their interests. So that's why I think you need to support Newsbud. I think, you even if you're, no matter where you are on the income scale, if you believe in a society that works, a civil society in a country that works, and frankly a world that works, or is at least moving in the right direction, you've got to have the information and the transparency to make the decisions about the important issues of the day. And if you're leaving 99% of the important issues off the table, or distorted, or just kind of riddled in such opaqueness that you can't make it out, there's no chance that the world's going to work right. There's no chance the country's going to work right. There's no chance your community is going to work right. And you can just bring it down to your own family. I mean, if you can't trust, that what your kids or your parents are telling you is the truth, you've got a dysfunctional family. I mean, you really do aspire in a family unit to be open with each other, even when things are not pretty. So you can solve the problems. And those families usually work best. And I think it's extended up the ladder to 300 million people in a country, 350 million people in a country. If we're not worried about each other and our society, then we're gonna have problems that are gonna affect all of us, and they're not gonna be pretty problems. And we're seeing the consequences of some of that. It's gone on for way too long that independent media is been, co-opted to a large measure, and I don't think we are getting a proper role of the proper role of journalism in a society, as they say, is the fourth estate. It's supposed to be another check on the abuses of power. Journalism itself is become, too powerful and unaccountable in many cases to be a check on anything. So we got to kind of reinvent it. It's up to us. It's up to this generation. You're, as readers, as people, you have a stake in this, and help us do it. You can be part of it.
Guillermo, anything you'd like to say to people sitting on the fence at the moment?
Yeah, well, it's a tough act to follow, Bill. Now you said it all, but
Yeah.
I completely agree. And I guess not to be too repetitive, because I know I did say something similar in a different conversation about Newsbud. But yeah, I do think that this sort of organization is the ideal setup. When we look across the media landscape, you see, by and large, it's either foundation funded, it's a sugar daddy operation, perhaps a single owner type operation. It's either state owned or, again, some sort of large corporation. It's by and large that describes the sort of financial backing of most media outlets. And not to say that any of that is inherently bad, but it does come with its own set of inherent problems and challenges. And I think it comes with their own sort of inherent doubts that readers have in their minds as to why is it that this particular outlet is covering this issue in this way. Is it because they're being financed by, so on, so on, so on, and so forth? With a reader-supported organization, you don't have those questions or doubts. You know exactly who we're being funded by. You know exactly who we're responsive to. You're responsive to your audience. And that ultimately is the ideal situation. And so if for listeners, readers out there, if you look across the landscape and judge for yourselves, is there an outlet that writes for you, that speaks for you? If there isn't, I don't think there is, or much anyway out there in the way of the sort of, again, large, multi faceted, what's the word I'm looking for? A large group of journalists gathered under one umbrella, putting this together. If you find there isn't much of that and you'd like to see it, this is the outlet for you, and I'd encourage you to support it. On a personal note, I mean, if any of you guys out there will have been following my work in Traces of Reality or Demanufacturing Consent, and have been wondering what the hell has happened to it, we'd like to see more of it. And there's at least a couple of dozen of you out there, right? So if you'd like to see more podcasts like that, then support this project, because you'll be seeing more of that in the future if you go ahead and do that. So, again, to reiterate what you were saying, James, February 14th, that's the day, guys. So to mark that on your calendars, and please support this project.
Sibel, did you remember that third thing you were going to talk about?
No, but we are 2 weeks away. And I personally have been in this, what I call battle, but it's also has been a journey, starting with whistleblowing, all the court cases, etc., for 14, 15 years now. And I see the clock is ticking faster for some reason. We have been going down steadily and not really slowly. I think it's escalating. It's going down faster and faster. With James Corbett and all of us here, we covered, for example, just 2-3 years ago, the entire Snowdon story and NSA. And we actually, all of us, at least I remember, James and I accurately predicted that with this, they were going to come out and it was going to be the new normalcy. It was not going to cause anything. It was going to bring it and make it out and open and get it accepted. And what we see 2 years after the so-called revelations, after the so-called whistleblowing, none of those we truly believe in, we see where we are with NSA. And I don't see really, and I don't hear many people talking about it any longer. Do you, James?
So not anything like it was before.
No.
I saw a headline last week, latest Snowdon, whatever document, and crickets, just nothing. No one gives a shit anymore.
No, I think now he's building robots and is moving more into Hollywood stuff and everything. So it has gotten away from NSA. But the clock is ticking for all of us. This is not clock ticking for Newsbud. This is not clock ticking for the clock ticking for the whistleblower. One of the things I do appreciate with James Corbett's programs, many of his programs, he brings up the topic of solution. And individuals being able to take some actions, possible actions, however little there may be. You never see that. You never see that in any of the so-called alternatives. And this is one of the things I mean and I talk about when I say empowering media. Because when you do a lot of problem statements and say how bad it is and do the fear-mongering, etc., even if they're all factual, even if it's not really exaggerated, and just leave it hang there, what are you doing? You're actually taking power from the people. All it does is, oh, this is horrible. And obviously there's nothing I or my friend, no, we can't do anything about it. And to say that let's say just in our country, in the United States, let's say, not Japan right now, but in the United States, 300 million people, let's say, okay, take away the kids, etc., 250 million people are feeling powerless against a handful of people. To me, that is the scariest part. That this can be the reality, that 250 million people feel so helpless and powerless against dozens of people. And this is one of the paradigms that we hopefully together with our team, but also with our readers, with our viewers, hopefully we can challenge that. Hopefully we can come up with ways to challenge that and change that, and start talking about solutions and start talking about actions, because nobody's doing. As I said, other than James, I haven't seen anywhere people saying here and here and here. And here are possible or potential things that you can do as an individual, or maybe as two people, but as an individual, to say you are not nothing. You are not nobody. You do matter. And what you think and put in action does matter. That's the empowering media we want to be. And that's the empowered media we want to become collectively with our readers and viewers.
Well said. So I think we will leave it at that. Again, it is in the hands of the people out there, whether or not Newsbud takes off the ground or fails to fly, but I hope you will, at the very least, check it out. Once again, February 14th will be the kickoff for the fundraising. Of course, there will be more details coming out through Boiling Frogs Post, and I'm sure through the Corbett Report between now and then, but please do sign up for the email list if you want to keep informed with all of that. Let's get Bill Conroy, the budget, to go sit down and interview Chapo Guzman himself. And on that note, I think we're going to leave it there.